The first session here is our open networks challenging dominant centralized platforms. Please join me to welcome on stage the moderator for this session, Mr. Vadivelan Sivanantham, CTO, NPCI Bharat BillPay Limited, and our esteemed speakers for this session, Mr. Rahul Handa, Executive Vice President, Strategic Initiatives, Open Network for Digital Commerce, Mr. Anil Kuril, CTO, Union Bank of India, Mr. Arif Khan, Chief Executive Officer, Razorpay, Mr. Sanjay Purohit, Chief Curator, Societal Thinking, and Ms. Lalitha Nataraj, Head Payments Digital Partnerships, D2C, and Payments, IDFC First Bank. Can we have a round of applause for them, please?
All right. Good morning, everyone. Nice morning, and we're going to start off with an intellectual conversation, I guess. So we have a diversified panel here. I want to talk about open networks and central platform. Yeah. Again, without further delay, let me get started first. First of all, we just wanted to understand what is really open network and what is central platform, right? So just you'll hear out from the panelists on what do they think are the open network or the central platform. Yeah. Maybe I'll go start with Rahul first.
Thanks. So, how many of you have heard about ONDC? Oh, good.
That's a room full.
That's a room full, right? Now, how many of you know what is ONDC? Say a fewer hands.
It is really an adverse selection here, huh, Rahul?
I know. So now, let's start this with saying, see, the standard platform approach is what we've all grown up with. All of us. Without fail, a lot of us in this room have actually ordered as early as probably yesterday from some platform. We've ordered either some electronics or some fashion or something or groceries, which has probably been delivered today or yesterday itself or will be delivered tomorrow or so. But that is an experience that you're used to because we are in a metro. All right? And if you look at a platform world, frankly speaking, that is covering just about 6 to 7% of India. Am I right? We are all aware of that, right? Same way, if you look at the banking space also, it isn't that 100% of India has a bank account. A large bit does, by the way. And that has all happened because of DPI. Because when we began in 2008, and I remember this from Pramod Verma's slides also, when we began in 2008, the initial thought process was that India is one of the worst banked countries. And chances that if you want to get to something like open up 50 million accounts and all, it'll take you like maybe a decade or 2 decades. Right? That was the view. In under 5 years, we have over 80% of the people in India having an account, which would never have been possible. When we began, now I'm going to take a dig at these guys from NPCI also, right? When we began, everybody used to turn around and say, NPCI, where? Yeah, who the hell knows what the hell is it? It's never going to work. But at that same point in time, now you look at the transaction volumes that they do. Seriously. And India, using that UPI construct, is the first place in the world where we are able to finish a transaction in under 5 seconds. Nowhere else in the world. So India, by that logic, is actually way ahead of everybody else. And we are trying to actually do a lot more. Coming back to the platform side. The platform side is where there are inherent inefficiencies built into it from a simple perspective. A platform has to own the customer side and the platform also has to own the seller side because that's the only way they knew how to do it. That's the only way everybody's ever thought about it. Right? So if I'm a customer, I will only go to that one particular platform, and specifically most of them are also extremely vertical specific. What that means is that in any vertical you look at, there are only going to be maybe 2, maybe 3 top players, and that's it. So the market is largely controlled by this. These platforms own the customer in the sense that you've already got terms and conditions because of which you are able to see. But on the seller side, you also have a lot of these sellers who have contractual obligations to them. That is why they were able to control that particular transaction. And contractual obligations covering margins, covering terms and conditions, covering deliveries, issues, etc., etc. But largely not in the favor of the sellers. That's the world that has been there in the platform side. Now, what open networks do is in the simplistic form that there is a buyer application, which means that this buyer application has a responsibility to their customer. So they are acting as the customer's agent. Their responsibility is to the customer. There is a separate seller application whose responsibility is towards the seller. So you are no longer, one entity is no longer having to cover customer acquisition cost also, seller acquisition cost also, building a cart also, etc., etc. Everything can be broken up. So you're going to one application as a customer, and the customer, as a customer, you can be B2B, B2C, etc., where you create an order. That order is then sent across to wherever it has been finalized out on the seller side, and they are fulfilling this, which means that we are breaking up that construct where you need to own the customer also, you need to own the seller also. Now, this was for a product side.
Yeah.
Then, if there is this customer side and I've broken it up, same way, not just for the product flow, I can also do this for financial services, which means that I have a borrower coming on to a buyer application, and now, just from a discoverability perspective, he doesn't have to go to 5 different platforms to look for a particular credit or for an insurance. There are all the other OEMs sitting on the seller side itself, no? So everybody responds back. So simplistic way, platform world is closed. And when I look at the open network side, we as the enablement function as an ONDC, we are only here to enable a customer to come to a buyer application, which is going to go to multiple seller applications to get back responses that you need.
Thanks, Rahul. See, again, in short, basically we have ecosystem. When we build the ecosystem, we have ecosystem players, and I think unbundling is required, and all the network players, how do they work together is what the whole network is all about, and how we make it open network. I think that's what Rahul is talking about. Maybe I'll move on. Maybe Sanjay, I'll come to you. So why do you think the open network is coming to an existence? You want to throw some lights about it?
Sure. Thanks, Vadi. Good morning. I think firstly, I want us to sort of step back and say that being in open networks is the natural order of things. That's how all ecosystems work. That's how nature works. That's how all of us actually as humanity work. And these constraints are created by different imaginations of different businesses, kind of people, to be able to appropriate value. That's the whole idea. So if the larger objective is that how do we make the financial services or healthcare services or commerce work for everyone, the natural tendency of everyone is to be in an open network, right? If you go back, the idea that there is something called as a platform, the idea that there is something called as a closed ecosystem are structures that are imagined by us, and they're imposed on an open network. And then they impose on an open network to create different kinds of control points, and if it creates control points, it allows you the ability to appropriate value. The question is, can we do that same thing by thinking about the larger ecosystem as our network? Now, it's a paradigm question. Thomas Kuhn, when he wrote The Structure of Scientific Revolution, because all of you are disruptors in your own right in the fintech industry, wrote that, people who live in one paradigm cannot prove that paradigm with evidence of the prior paradigm. It's like Einstein trying to prove relativity with the data or the efforts made by Newton. It's not possible, right? And so if all of us are thinking about how do you make financial services industry work for the entire country at scale, it's a different paradigm. And that paradigm is not rationalization of the prior paradigm, it's a new way of thinking. And if the entire country is going to be interconnected, given the speed at which digitization is happening, digital public infrastructure is being put in, digital penetration is happening, connectivity is happening, then we all have to think in that paradigm. And that paradigm is how to make the services work in an open network. Because to imagine that one single closed network can serve 1.4 billion people obviously is by its statement looks unviable. And what's viable for a country of our size and beyond even cross-border and thinking about those things is to think more about. So why is it important? Is innovators have to think in that paradigm. And whatever is happening, you are the ones who will obviously ride on what's happening with open networks, but more importantly, the people who are focused on this would create open networks rather than getting trapped into the mindset saying, oh, I need to copy or learn from closed networks and create one more closed network. Because if you fall into that pathway and think that the answer for the future is to create more and more closed networks, then we will not be able to leverage, embrace, and serve the scale at which we really want to serve. If you want to serve at scale, then the purpose, that purpose can only be served through very large interconnected open networks. So that's what I would like to share.
Thanks, Sanjay. So paradigm shift, and for us to scale up, I think we definitely need new way of thinking like open network. Now, let's dwell deeper a bit more about various dimensions, right? What we need to look out for open networks. So what I've done is just two parameters I picked up, and probably I'll come each one of you and you can talk about those parameters. How does that fit into open network with this central platform kind of? And that'll give more details for the audience as well. So the first one, maybe Rahul, I'll start with you. Scale is the main aspect that we want to achieve, right? But at the same time, sustenance is important as well, right? So from your perspective, what do you think, scaling and sustaining? Do you think open networks or central platform, or how is this really going to coexist?
So from a scale perspective, it is always going to be open networks. For the simple reason that open networks allow you to do two major things. One is you're setting your own terms and conditions, which cause you to scale faster, right? Please, by the way, when we talk about scale right now, what Sanjay ji was also alluding to is that we're not trying to do something for 10 million people or 100 million people. Please keep in mind what we are trying to do right now as open networks is something that will impact 1 billion people. And if you're trying to do something for 1 billion people, you cannot have one small or large entity also trying to control that, because it is a control measure. So if you're trying to scale, the fact of it is that first thing that it'll come down to is how do you sustain? Because to scale needs sustenance also. You can't just say, I'm going to start building out something and I'll keep losing money. That doesn't work. So it has to be a simple process of turning around and saying, I will make money. I will not go and blow up money. But to scale, I am going to do one small sliver of this and let everybody else create that entire eco chain for that one particular transaction to be completed. But in that sphere, since I don't have to build out everything, that one small sphere, how do I create what is it that I want? So to give you an example, I'm going to turn around and say, I'm a seller application. I want to get 2% of that sale from the seller. The buyer application says, I want 1% of that. Now that brings down that overall construct of that costing of that particular transaction to where in the platform world is like 40% and all of those things, it comes down. The second thing that scale is requiring is to build out that market. At this point in time, just about 6% of India is actually transacting digitally. Now, if you want to go down to 1 billion people, that means that we have to reimagine the products and the associated services that come with it. What that means is that where from a product perspective, right? Where I'm actually selling tea for 500 rupees in a hotel and going down to a smaller side hotel where I'm spending 200 rupees, or I'm going down to the street and buying a 10 rupee tea, not in BKC. But otherwise, if you look at it, that 10 rupee tea is going to come with its own product flavor and how it is delivered. Right? So scale, and each one of these different points, because they are tapping a different segment of society. That's one. Sustainability is absolutely important from the simple perspective that each one of these products and the services that are going with it needs to be sustainable in itself. So look at the product and look at the sustainability that goes within that.
Yeah. So the network effect and have categories and focus on each of the categories. I think that's what Rahul is talking about. And while Rahul talked, he touched upon the digital and aspects, right? Maybe Lalitha, I'll come to you. So digital and inclusion, right? So one of the major challenges that we have is digital literacy, and there is a divide between urban and rural from a digital perspective, right? So what do you see, or how do you think these parameters will exist in the new era or open network with a central platform?
Yeah, see, open networks are supposed to be simpler for people to onboard themselves onto, right? Let's take an example of Nammayatri. If a set of cab drivers of Bangalore on Kerala have been able to onboard themselves as, I would say, quote-unquote, sellers of a service, and people have been able to just call a cab and we do, like, let's say, 1 lakh transactions a day, it just is an example. I mean, it's not that at this point in time, those cab drivers will not be present on an Ola or an Uber. It is possible that for now, these platforms and the networks coexist because there is a little bit of a platform trust which is still there in customers' mind. But what open networks are also doing is, if I understand right, they take a part of these learnings. Let's say, for example, the contract is a code in the open network, right? You can still have a bilateral with me. You can give me a better terms and condition as a seller, but it's a part of the code. So these are embedded into the contract of open networks, which make it easier and better transparent and scale. I mean, if I have to just go back to what Rahul said, what India achieved in 5 years, and I hear from Mr. Pramod Dharma that any other country would have taken probably 47 years to achieve. So we are a country in a hurry. We need to get to the next level at a rapid pace, and open networks is perhaps the way to go. The platforms will coexist, but open network is going to make life simpler for people for the next level, for them to self-onboard themselves and self-service themselves and avoid the contractual obligations or probably the bilateral engagements which a platform today enforces. So that's the way I see as an advantage.
Thanks, Lalitha. I think you touched upon a point on when the inflection point is going to happen. Maybe we'll talk about it a bit more later. The other point is on the technology side, right? While the speed is what we are going towards, right? The technology is also changing so fast. And again, we'll need to do a quicker adoption as well. So how do you think these two parameters come together in this context?
I think if you look from the open network point of view, the inherent advantage of the coexistence of various technologies, that is the main benefit of the open network. When we talk about the platform, which means that everything is uniform, everything is controlled, what you do, what you cannot do, everything is fixed, decided by some central authority or the people who are involved in that. Now, in an open network paradigm, everything can coexist in that, which means that whether you are at the buyer side, whether you are at the seller side, you have liberty. Now, even in an open network, when we talk about, obviously, nothing is a completely open network. Obviously, some rule of engagement has to be there. Somebody need to decide the rule of game. And obviously those things will do exist. And particularly when you are talking about the money and the services and the reliability is involved there, obviously there will be certain rules there. But essentially in an open network environment, there are technology which is of tomorrow, and there will be room or provision for engaging the technology of yesterday's also. So both way, the entire scale is very large, And that's why it become very important for a country like India to adopt the open network. Now, where you are not bounded by certain set rule or certain strict requirement part of it, because if you look at the people involved in the entire open network part of it, they come from the various background. They are not like a foreign bank or the public sector bank or private sector bank. Even the people who are from the fintech, even the people from the traditional companies, they are also, everybody is getting involved into that. And that's why it become very easy for people to hook on to the open network. And I think that is a power of an open network, where we see that the plethora of technologies coming together and providing an ecosystem where you as a consumer get the services which you intend to take it. And also there are service providers who are equally capable of providing those services. Obviously, there are certain other factors involved in that, but essentially that is what I look at as far as the technology is concerned. And second part is that now open networks, they have a capability to scale up. Like my colleague has said already, it has that kind of a capability to scale. If you have to serve 1 billion people, obviously you need to have those kind of network, technology, and the protocol to support that. So obviously, the open networks are more flexible, they are more open to adopt the changes, and obviously they also encourage the innovation side of it. Because that is one area which, while we are seeing that the platforms are doing a very good job, they have brought us to this level. I think the next stage is set for the open network, where the open network can take us to the serve the 1 billion people, and that is what I see as. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Anil. I think you touched upon an important point on innovation. So with that, Arif, I'll come to you. From an innovation, I think it's a tricky piece, right? You would have to innovate, at the same time you need to maintain the resiliency, right? So how do you compare these two again between open network and central platforms?
Yeah, actually, Vadi, I'm yet struggling, right, between open network, platform, a lot of technology, and obviously, thanks to Rahul, a lot of ONDC, right? So, yeah. But I'll just go back, right? I think for me, it's a little more simpler understanding, and I think Sanjay touched upon it, right? I mean, as societies, we've been doing it, right, for a long time, right? And a very simple way I look at things is there were highways that were built, right? It did one purpose only, there were highways. By itself, it did not have value, right? But it created values, right? On the highway, what can move? Your two-wheelers, four-wheelers, your trucks, double axle, etc. As long as there are no toll gates, we should avoid that, right? And then along the way, there is food courts and all that, right? So what it means to me simply first, the definition is you do one block, and that one block is what is the necessity and not necessarily fulfilling the criteria of being sufficient. And then allow everything to be built as a value around it, right? So it's a lot of unbundling that happens over there. And the moment you start thinking about it from an unbundling and a minimalistic point of view, I think scale solves for itself, right? I mean, if you look at scale from a technology point of view, I think it's the complexity that people like us get to the table, right? And it depending on the role we play. So in my earlier days, I was wearing a product hat. What do? You keep loading it with a lot of features. You keep building, right? So like some thousands of lines of codes, and you never clean it up after that, right? And you try to do everything. And I think that's where the scale and the complexity comes into picture, right? And that's where also the centralization to a certain extent comes in, right? I think it's about, for a vibrant democracy like us, right? I think it's about keeping it simple. We need to look at it extremely simply. Allow value to be unlocked. I mean, one of the best examples, all of us have Aadhaar, right? I was on the other side when Aadhaar was happening, right? People who were not very happy with it in the earlier days, but then understood over a period of time and adopted, right? So I was surprised that Aadhaar has, I think, only 4 or 5 fields, right? Just 4 or 5 values. I'm not sure if one of you guys recollect what it is. And then you compare it to any other identity that is happening anywhere in the world, it's got some, I think bare minimum average is some 12 different fields, right? Now, Aadhaar in itself, is it something? No. But today, anyone wants to open a bank account, get into mutual fund. There's a lot of unlocking, right? So I think by itself, it will unlock value, right? Let's understand from a UPI point of view. So let's give a bit of credit to UPI also, since they're doing 12 billion a month. What is UPI, right? It's just a messaging protocol that allows value to move. It's not even money, right? And the value could be in any form. So if you look at the innovations that UPI has been doing, right, and NPCI has been bringing to the table, along with the ecosystem, yesterday, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, UPI, credit on UPI got enabled, right? Around a few months back, UPI on credit card got enabled. Prior to that, there was obviously UPI on savings account and then UPI on overdraft, a bunch of them. But if you look at it, you go back to the protocol, it has always been there, right? It said it will move value, store value, right? It doesn't matter whether it's in the form of any currency, whether it's US dollars, rupees, agnostic, it's abstracted to that. It's abstracted to geography, right? And the moment that's where it is very minimalistic, simplified the protocol, I think all the unbundling will happen and that will allow a lot of innovations to happen, right? I mean, a lot of people look at only the real-time transaction, but let's look at the life cycle of transactions, right? I don't know if you guys recollect, right? In the earlier world where we had card schemes, international card schemes, and I was a part of that, a settlement, which is extremely important for a financial institute, right? The customer has come and done the transaction, but there is money movement happening between institutes, right? A domestic transaction settlement was happening on a T+2. An international transaction settlement was happening on a T+3. And imagine when settlement happening on T+2 and a T+3, the risk it brings, the liquidity challenges, and blah, 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 blah. But now you look at UPI, you're doing 8 settlements a day. You look at RuPay, I think they're doing 4 or 5. They must have made it 8 or they can go to 10 or whatever, right? What does it mean? It means you can do a reconciliation in near real time, which was never possible. Is that a great value? I mean, I think people nowadays associate everything which is innovation with AI, right? I don't necessarily see it that way. But imagine India does 8 settlements on a real-time system. I think that's fantastic, right? So coming back, I think let's keep it very simple. If you keep it simple, I think the value unblocking will happen. It will allow others to build on it. And at the same time, scaling, which is normally, and I understand where you're coming from, running BBPS, okay? I think if you stay true to the purpose as to what is meant to do, rather than say, okay, we'll keep loading with features, I think scale should not be a big challenge. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
So one more thing I want to add in, right? So scale is not just built out on unbundling. As both of them are also talking about, right? There is that entire component associated with interoperability, which is why we are talking about forward and backward, etc., right? So, and for that, a certain set of rules are built out. So, like Arif was just giving an example of a highway. Now, the rule that we set up is that everybody's got to drive on the left side of the road. You don't want to have highways where somebody's coming in from the right side of the road because that will cause a jam up. Now, similarly speaking, one more thing I want to leave with this group is that inherently we believe only a network, we are talking about it. Mentally we say yes, an open network is there. But when we are starting to use it, we think the platform chalega. But at the same point in time, we are also very inherently using open networks. Standard example is your email. ऐसा तो नहीं है ना, somebody sitting on Gmail can't send an email to Hotmail. Similarly speaking, from your perspective, if there is money in the account, it's not possible that you will walk into a different bank using XYZ bank's ATM and shove that ATM card in and you will not be able to pull money if there is money. It will work. That is because of interoperability, not because of unbundling.
Yeah. So again, highways is a great example. I think it's being simple and again, just one point I wanted to call out, right? When we say highways, it's going to accommodate everybody, right? So we'll discuss more on how the coexistence is going to be and how long it's going to go and all, right? So before that, I'll come to Sanjay. Sanjay, you want to talk about democratization and regulation, right? So while we really want to democratize, we need regulations as well, right? So how do you think these two coexist and in this context?
Sure. I think, like we were discussing before, the paradigm of the platform and the open network. In platform paradigm, the platform builds the network. In the network paradigm, the network is the platform. I think there is a very important paradigm change in these two things. Looking at democratization versus regulation, imagine, let me give you a visual of forests versus farms. Okay, so the way forests regulate themselves is very different. It's a resplendent, biodiverse thriving ecosystem. And the way farms are governed by us or regulated by us is very different, right? Where it is procedures, SOPs, straight lines, you have to plant like this at this time, put this water. These are very two different regulation and democratization paradigms. They have their own pluses and minuses. Inherently, farms are unscalable and forests are infinitely scalable. So if you have to look at this question of democratization is essential to embrace the diversity. Like we say, India is a country of a billion different cultures because every Indian is a different culture in herself. And so the question is that if you're looking at that diversity, and if you serve that diversity across the rank and file in the villages and the towns and the different economic, socioeconomic, there's so many dimensions around which we are diverse, then democratization of any capability is the central answer because we can't go and stamp the farm procedure on everything saying this is what you should be doing, right? It's an SOP, this is what you do. It's possible to do it when you're serving 5%, 7%, 10% of the population, but it's very hard to do when you're serving 80, 90% of the population. And if you want to go in the paradigm of the forest, where there are self-regulating mechanisms, then that setting up that regulation is very, very different. It's not that forests are unregulated. We should not be under that mindset. They're deeply regulated. And so it's a fine line. And I would use the term, what is the net positive trade-off between decentralization and regulation? Because both have consequences. And what is the right trade-off at which we as a society can make progress is the question. And that's a question for all the regulators, all the question for innovators who are trying to drive further and further democratization and decentralization, regulators who are worried that it's an unobservable system. I can't see it. If I can't see it, I don't know what is happening. And our neuropsychologically speaking, we are geared to believe if I can't see it, it must be bad. Something bad is happening. But that may not be true. But the question is, as we lose our visibility into the forest, we don't know whether what's happening, so we want to gain visibility. The best way to gain visibility is to burn the forest, put a farm. Right? That's the best way to gain visibility. Remove the forest, put a farm, now I can see everything. So I think this dichotomy is again a paradigm dichotomy as to how do we think about the role of different actors, what are we regulating? And it's a question of a profound understanding of the innovators and the regulators who are on one, and how do we work together as innovators and regulators so that we can create a very thriving rainforest rather than we work together to create a farm. If we want to create a forest. If you want to serve 10 million people out of 1.4 billion people by creating farms, sure, we have that one sorted out. But the other dimension is yet to be sorted out as to how do we actually work together to regulate a forest. So I would leave you with that imagery that what are you doing? Are you building more farms or are you trying to build a thriving ecosystem, biodiverse rainforest? That's the question.
So Sanjay, I have a question for you. As I told you, I was confused on the highway. I was really confused on the highway, right? Imagine trying to cross the highway with all the lights. So I'm that confused old man. So, we're running out of time, but how would you define the internet today? Would you call it a rainforest or would you call it a farm? And a binary answer.
No, I think the rainforest is closer to the internet is closer to a rainforest than to a farm. And that is why also this regulatory struggle around trying to control the internet, trying to put regulations on top of it, trying to create different, all the pushback comes because...
But with a little bit of encroachment, right?
I'm sorry?
The internet has a little bit...
Oh yeah, it's not that Amazon has not been burned by humans.
Right, thanks. Sir.
Yeah, actually, one more thing that I want to throw out there is that from a regulation perspective, right? For example, what we are doing within ONDC is that the law of the land is sacrosanct, right? But under those circumstances, yes, the laws of the land were also built from a platform perspective because that was largely there. And Arif, to your point, the internet is largely unregulated, but it runs on its own. But there is some regulation there. There is some procedure there. There is some protocol there. That is why you go from HTTP to HTTPS, etc., etc.
It's not unregulated. It is not regulated like a farm.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I'd correct myself.
No, I think it's like those Texas farms. Right? It's like acres and acres, and
Exactly.
you don't realize as customers. This is, I think that's looks like. I mean, I'm being a bit cynical over here, but hopefully, the way India looks at DPI, the way ONDC, UPI, hopefully we are not going that way. I mean, looks like we are not going to go that way. So
You're exactly right, right? The view that we have also at ONDC is that every segment should be able to come in and create what they need to enable themselves on an open network. This is not something that ONDC will come in and we will drive it down people's throats. No, no. This is something that the ecosystem comes and says, we want to do it like this. We will be, and we will go and make whatever conversations there are within that ecosystem. An ecosystem would be everybody there, so that we come to a single point and we start driving, right? At that same point in time, please keep in mind that what we started off with, for example, when we started off in January, we had maybe food, we had something around grocery and maybe agri B2C, just about 2 or 3 segments. And now you look at it, we've just launched out financial products from a credit perspective. We are going to launch out insurance from the next couple of in the next couple of weeks also. So there is a lot that we are also coming out with, which is not possible if you try and do a farming process. Okay? It is only possible if we are also building out multiple rainforests.
I'll just take one more
You should
second.
disrupt Buddy's flow.
We're going cross-sectoral, right, as we move forward. And when you move cross-sectoral, it's going to be difficult, more and more to regulate, right? But I think India has, fantastically mastered the art of a right balance, because no regulation means no trust, more regulation means no innovation. If you just look at UPI as an example, right? When UPI came, there was just P2P, then came P2M, then came auto-pay, then came recurring mandate. So there's a gradual progression that is happening, and the good things of the platforms are being inherited by the networks. The ODR is something that an OND is inheriting because they feel that it moves along. So I think there's a fine balance already existing. So it is a question of picking up a leaf out of that and just moving forward. That's how we all see it.
Yeah, I think very well said. Just to kind of put one line on the forest conversation that's going on here, right? And I think if you think about an open network, what's an open network in the forest? Is it the trees? Is it the biodiverse species, flora, fauna, or is it the soil? If it is like the soil, right, which is the ONDC, but all the trees and all the other are the actors of the network. The question, who's the regulator? Is the regulator the soil? Is the regulator the trees? Is the regulator the nutrients? Who's the regulator in this ecosystem, right? I would not answer that question. I would leave you with that question saying, in this paradigm, who is the regulator? No, I think regulating in a network paradigm, it's the balance of the network which is the regulating force. It is not a regulator. There is a role called regulator. Somebody is coming and playing. But to assume that it is the be-all of how the forest is regulated, in a forest, there is no be-all regulator that exists. These are all self-regulating systems. But there are some people there will be the fungal networks which will regulate flow of micronutrients. There will be the soil which will do the job of. There are many, many actors. There are many regulators of a forest. There is not a regulator of a forest.
I think this conversation will go on. The forest is a swarm. So we'll continue to have that conversation later, but in the interest of time, let's move on. So one last thing from each one of you, again, keep it short. What would be the closing remarks in terms of what do you want to suggest to the audience, be it customer facing or market facing, all right? What is your closing remark for them in approaching open network versus centralized platform? A quick one, just 2 minutes left for us.
I think ONDC should go first. Yeah.
And there will be no time left. You go.
Lalitha, the banker.
No, so I think one thing we need to keep in mind is that it's simple yet complicated. It's important for the networks to get the balance right. There is a lot of awareness, there is a lot of innovation in fraud also when you get into open platforms, when you get into, so like Sanjay said, like Rahul said, establishing that trust is extremely important. Market, the closed platforms and the open networks are going to coexist for some time. They'll just have to share their learnings and move on. But this is a way to go. Unbundling is something that has been proven in UPI. Unbundling and scale are coexisting. So we have a long way to go. I guess every sector will open up and people will embrace and move along.
Yeah, I think my take on this is that when it comes to the open network and the platform, both are going to coexist, because when the entrepreneurs are involved, obviously, when the people are involved, when the government are involved, obviously, both the things are going to stay. One thing definitely, I'm very confident on that part, that when it comes to the open network, innovation will come. Now, innovation thrives on an open network platform, because it is a community which is going to decide that what is good for the network. And based on that, it's going to be adopted. I think as a consumer, as a stakeholder of an open network, obviously that is what go ahead. But both things are going to stay there.
Sure. You want to go? Sure. I don't know. I don't know if I am informed enough to be of any advice to the audience, but I try to do 3 things. I hope you find that useful. One is, this is a paradigm that we have to learn more and more and more about. So we have to study different kinds of networks, study what's happening constantly. This is a completely different way of emergence that's happening, and we have to stay on top of it. Secondly, we have to stay together as a community of innovators and thinkers, right? Networks are built by connected people. And all of us here and not in the room, we have to stay constantly connected on this issue rather than saying, oh, that's X and this is Y. Because many a times competitiveness in our minds tries to distinguish in saying, I am not that, I am this. But that's not how networks work. Networks work by saying, let's learn. That's the second important thing. Third, I think doing will trump thinking. So we have to prototype, we have to try, we have to experiment as much as we can. We have to try to see how we can leverage the network, because doing will trump any debate, any conversation, any thinking, any day. So my suggestion would be, let's learn, let's stay connected, and let's do something with open networks. That is the way out of this paradigm.
Thanks, Sanjay. Quick one, Rahul.
Define quick. Okay, so my view is relatively simple, right? One is that a network does not mean that there is no platform. There will be certain platforms because somebody has to provide for a certain service, which will always be there. The second thing that comes in is there is an unbundling and interoperability part. So work with the different networks that are there, and our view is, please come to us and tell us what are the new ideas that you want to work with. We are here as the enablement function. As ONDC, we are the enablers. We are not here to govern you. We are not here to tell you what to do. We are here to listen to you. And as part of that, if you have any queries, please reach out to me. My email address is simple, rahul@ondc.org. Please do that, and I'll come and we will respond back.
Thanks, Rahul. Arif, last one for you.
So actually, Sanjay again got me thinking, right? So I was asking myself, am I centralized or am I rainforest? And I realized I'm a married man, so I'm heavily regulated. So, yeah, but I really don't have any suggestions. But my only request, right? And I think DPI, I think the moment that started in India, and we need to continue, as Sanjay said. In this G20, there's been a lot of conversation. In fact, G20 kind of defined it recently. It's a pretty lengthy one. But when we start, and a lot of entities over here, fintechs, banks, ONDC, hopefully it will go global, all that stuff. I think we need to think about that, whether we abstract back to the principles or we get into, those typical specification and technical conversation, right? I worry sometimes that if we go very tech first in terms of specs and ISO and XML and those kind of things, with all what is happening in the geopolitics, I don't think so we're going to cut it. I think if we can abstract ourselves and go back to the base principles, some of that what you discussed, I think then we can really take of what we have in India, take it to the larger this thing and get them to be part of the larger forest, right? So I think that's going to be the key.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Arif. Thanks, all the panelists. I know we are over time already, but thanks for sharing all your thoughts. We'll continue the debate on the forest versus farm. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.